So first I'd like to acknowledge that we're hosting this series from Adelaide, also known as Tarndanya, and it's the land of the Kaurna people. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and share my appreciation for their deep relationship with the land, sea, and air. This series is about something incredibly important, and it centers around soils. So at first glance, soils are often seen as just a material that we walk on or in which plants grow. But if you dig a little deeper, literally, it becomes clear that soils are the foundations of terrestrial life. They're inherently relational as well, so they're conglomerates of physical, chemical, and biological components. And in terms of life, there's a lot going on in soils, or at least there should be in healthy soils. So 59 to 99% of our planet's species live in soils, and they provide food. For instance, 95% of our calories are supported by soils. They filter our water, support biodiversity that makes ecosystems thrive. And the story doesn't stop in the ground. So the health of our soils is intimately connected to our own health. Now, from a big picture perspective, this is really clear. So we depend on healthy soils for our food that keeps us healthy and alive. And there are many indirect roles that soils play in our lives as well. Now, a growing body of research shows us that what we eat shapes our health and well-being, both physical and mental, and we're constantly learning new things about this relationship. For example, you can refer to the field of nutritional psychiatry for how food influences our mood, and this field was pioneered by Professor Felice Jacka, who's actually in the audience tonight, and she co-founded the Grounded Minds Consortium with us. But there's also a growing body of science that shows that the microbes living in soils influence the health of the plants that we eat and the microbes living inside us. So these invisible friends, they shape our immune systems, regulate inflammation, digest our food and provide us with nutrients, influence how our body's cells communicate with each other, and probably affect how we think and feel as well, via what's called the gut-brain axis. In other words, healthy soils with all their diverse microbial life forms grow healthy plants, but they also help grow healthy people. So over the next month, you'll hear from a lineup of incredible speakers. So we have scientists and practitioners and thought leaders, each exploring different aspects of this soil-gut-brain connection. Some of the talks will be focused on the relationship as a whole, and others will be more focused on a particular component of the relationship. For instance, like in last night's talk, we had Dr. Alice Martin talk about the gut microbiome. So there are 12 talks over the course of September, and it'd be great if you could attend several, if not all of them, if you're able to. And this way you can start to see the different components of this relationship and how they connect together. The talks will be recorded so you can watch them back on YouTube. And we hope that Soil Yourself September sparks conversations and inspires some action as well. So thanks for joining us on this journey. I invite you to listen and to question and connect, and most of all, to think about soils and our guts and our mental health and all of the connections in between. This is a big shout out to Ruben, who's been my partner in crime, helping to organise the series. So thanks, Ruben. And everyone's mics have been muted, but please add questions to the chat and I'll read them out to our speaker at the end. So with that, let's welcome our speaker, Professor Stephen Allender. He's a Deakin University Distinguished Professor of Public Health and founding director of the Global Centre for Preventive Health and Nutrition. So that's the GLOBE acronym, a World Health Organization collaborating centre. Stephen has held leadership roles in multiple NHMRC grants and Centres for Research Excellence, and has received lead investigator funding from many different research bodies. He holds a number of honorary appointments too. So he has ongoing programme of research on solving complex problems with a focus on the burden of chronic diseases and obesity prevention. Recent work has seen a particular interest in the burden of chronic diseases, malnutrition and climate change in developed and developing countries, and the possibilities for using complex systems approaches for community-based interventions. So over to you, Stephen. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jake. I just want to check that everybody can see my slides and not my notes, etc., etc. It's all looking good, looking right?
It's looking good from my end.
Fantastic, thank you. And look, I should apologise for the length of that introduction. Sometimes I realise it hasn't had an edit, so I do apologise to everybody for that. I'm really pleased to be here, grateful for the invitation and really excited to be a part of this initiative. One of the things that I think strikes me about the Grounded Minds Consortium and about the work that you'll hear about over the 12 talks, but also, you know, we're setting up a 20 to 30 year legacy piece of work here, is it's innovative because innovation is needed. And what that means is that we are going to cover a really broad range of things. So I am going to talk about things above the skin and above the ground. And so I'm going to talk much more about how you get things to change once we understand what needs to change. I really enjoyed Alice's talk last night. I thought it was brilliant to get down to the level of the gut. I'm not going to go to that level. So the starting assumption here is that improving and changing diets will have that flow and effect for soil and the gut. So that's part of this being such a diverse range of views, participants, and where we're headed. I'm not going to be upset if people think this is not for me and decide to go and have dinner or whatever, or breakfast or whatever it is where you are. But just a fair warning about where we're headed in the next half hour or so. So I will talk for the next half hour. It's traditional here to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which we're meeting. And for me, that's the Wathaurong country, which is the Ballerine Peninsula in Victoria, in Australia. It's also traditional for people to add to the chat the traditional owners of the country on which they're joining us from. So I'd be really grateful for people, wherever you are, to add to the chat where you're joining us from, which would be fantastic. I've planned about 30 to 35 minutes worth of content to talk a little bit about the work we're doing, a little bit about the way we think about particularly food systems. And so again, I'm going above the soil and I'm going above the skin, but I'm hoping you'll see the relevance for the conversation that's going on as the broader thing. I'm going to talk a bit about some software that we invented called Sticky. And I just want to make sure people are aware that I'm one of the inventors of that, so I have a bit of a stake in that. It's not worth any money, if I'm honest with you, but nevertheless, it's important that I disclose that. I've also been a commissioner on the Lancet Commission on Obesity, which I'll talk about a little bit. I hold multiple advisory roles, which you can see there. A bit out of date now, the funding sources there, but just to give a sense that I am speaking from an independent point of view, but equally I feel pleased to have support from a really wide range of places over the time I've been lucky enough to be doing this work. So what I want to do is start by giving a sense of how we see food systems really, and how we see the food system and its connection with individuals and its connection with place and its connection with soil. And one of the I suspect for most of this audience, one of the most obvious things we did in the Lancet Commission that I was a part of is we inverted the idea of the social determinants of health, and we put natural systems, our environment, at the middle. And it seems ridiculous and it's surprising, I think, for most people. But usually when we start building logic models of how we think about health, our usual starting point is to put the individual in the middle and the environment on the very far outside. And those who know about One Health, planetary health, will know that we're flipping this idea on its head, where if we don't have a natural system that's healthy, functioning, and supporting us, then we're pretty much in all sorts of trouble. And so this was one of the starting points. And we're talking 5 or 6 years ago now, so I'd like to think these ideas are no longer as radical as they were then, but this needed to be said at the time. So our starting point is to think about the natural systems in which we live and then work our way out from that to social determinants, human systems, and environments. That is, if the natural system is not supportive, we have nothing. And on the very outside of that are human factors like ecological health and well-being, human health and well-being, social equity, and economic prosperity. But frankly, without the natural system, those things around the outside are kind of meaningless. And even in the last 2 to 3 years, I think this has changed pretty radically. So I feel like I'm probably telling people things they already know, but even to a couple of years ago, this was fairly radical. And what I want to do is dial in a little bit on the top half of this diagram. And in this, we're really interested in one particular health outcome in this piece of work, and it was obesity. And one of the things that started becoming apparent was that obesity is syndemic, and it's a syndemic that's caused by overconsumption of the resources available to us, regardless of what those resources are. So when we start thinking about natural systems, that's overconsumption of what the land can provide us. It's overconsumption of the way that the land can support us, and the natural systems that exist are being pillaged to support these outer layers, which in fact, if we switch this the other way, wouldn't be the case. So actually, when we start thinking about it at a meta level, climate change, undernutrition, malnutrition, people not having enough food to be healthy, and obesity, people eating too much to be healthy, are the same thing. They're actually symptoms of overconsumption and of abuse of the natural systems in which we work. And the model we started thinking about was, well, okay, if we start working our way out from the natural system, we start thinking about the ways in which our economics, our policies, and our what we think is normal allows us to make those changes. How that affects how we think about food, how we think about transport, how we design the places we live in, and how we use the land that's available to us. And all of those then impact schools, hospitals, workplaces, public spaces, which in turn impacts our day-to-day life. So I'll talk a little bit in a moment about the idea of thinking about a cohesive system. And again, if you are hoping to see the brilliant video Alice showed us of the inside of the small intestine, you're not going to get that here. But what I'm hoping you're seeing is these are the things that fundamentally affect what happens in our gut, but we're talking at a meta level for that. So if we can establish the science for what happens in the gut and what happens at these different levels that affects what happens in the gut, this is how we make the policy level change and the global level change to affect those sorts of things. One of the things I think is a really good friend of ours, Corinna Hawkes, has led this piece of work through the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization. So the UN, this is the global clearinghouse. And she put together this really beautiful piece about transforming food and agriculture, but specifically through a systems approach. And I'm going to spend 5 or 10 minutes just fleshing out what I think a systems approach means and why I think that's important. And then a little bit of time talking a little bit about how you might use a systems approach. So I'll talk about a couple of really specific examples, but I really want people to hear what it means to think about the cohesive whole. So one of the classic mistakes we make is we pick one part of this framework and we say, okay, my focus is community. Okay, I'm just going to worry about urban design. Okay, I care about social norms, so I'm going to do a marketing program. And actually, these things are all interconnected, feedback on each other, and impact the lives that we live, but we don't explicitly spend some time with them. So the thing that makes this work Corinna has done brilliant is she is saying, can we put all of those things on the table at the same time? And can we address them all at the same time? So I'm going to use this idea of agriculture and systems approach, and particularly agri-food systems. And I think about, you'll hear, I think, over the source of these talks about school gardens, regenerative agriculture, land reuse, land zoning. My question, my challenge is, how do we understand those things from what happens at the gut level through to the global policy level? And my argument that I'm hoping to get across to you is that if we take a systems view, we can start seeing those things. Why this consortium is so important is because I think those views are all active at the same time. One of the challenges we have is how do you practically make that fly? Because that's quite a difficult thing. And that's part of what I'm hoping to talk about today. So what on earth am I on about when I talk about an agri-food system? What I'm thinking about when I think about agri-food systems and what Corinna described in her brilliant report is it's all aspects of the food system, from how it's grown, harvested, processed, distributed, traded, prepared, eaten and used, and how that feeds back into the global system. Now, when I was preparing the talk, and I'm still probably getting ready for this, there's going to be a lot of people saying, hang on, I thought I was here for a talk about microbiota in the gut. How come that's not part of your model? I'm hoping you can see where that fits here. My research is primarily about everything above the soil and above the skin. And so when we start thinking about that, this is the sort of thing we're looking at. And there are very few that have thought about how you put all of these pieces of the puzzle together so that you can understand this in a way you can change it for the value of health, health of the planet, health of the animals that live on the planet, including us. So this other aspect of this systems thing, so, okay, there's a food system, great. And if we were to think about a food system, these are the parts of how food is produced and gets to our table and leaves our table and where waste goes that we would think about. Fine. How do we understand a system in a way we can manage it and in a way that we can engage with it, in a way we can share how we see it with other people, and in a way we can develop an understanding that leads to change? So I think if I asked anyone on this call, could you say, give me 3 things we should fix? You could come up with 3 things in a heartbeat. Some people would say 3 things have to change in my street. Some people would say 3 things have to change in my state. Some people would say 3 things have to change in my fridge. And some people would say 3 things have to change in the global trade arrangements. And they're all right. But the question is, how do we understand the whole as a system? And this is where this idea of systems thinking comes from. Corinna's done a great job, this is her document again, of summarising the ways in which you think about a system. And she said, really, if you're going to do it, you've got to think at 6 different levels. And I'm going to show you in a minute how we do this at a community level to say, how as a community can you think about the food system you're working in to create change? In a way, the top one's a bit kind of obvious and a bit kind of radical, but it's sort of what I've been saying for the last 4 minutes or so, is how do we create a mindset where our starting point is to understand the whole system? How do we move away from, I only focus on one small part? Are you eating one thing or another, to see the whole system? The choice you make about what you have for lunch is determined not just by you making a choice, but by what's there, by why the people who've put it there have decided to put it there, by how much it costs to get it there, by who produced it, by where they produced it, by why they produced it, by how far it's travelled. And so starting to understand, we have to see that whole complexity to understand the mix of things we need to change to create a meaningful change is what we mean by a mindset that sees systems. How do we understand what that system is doing in terms of behaviour from a data and evidence point of view? Can we describe it? Can we measure it? Can we see how it's changing? How do we govern it? How do we understand who's in charge, who's responsible, and how those things change? How do we get implementation to happen? In my career, we've spent a lot of time doing building capacity to help people use systems thinking to make change. We do a great piece of work, and I'll show you this in a minute. And our communities that we work with, we've probably worked with maybe 4,000 or 5,000 people across Victoria in the last little while, and we can help them see the system. But implementation is a hard thing to do. It's not enough to see it and to plan how to fix it. It's actually quite hard to get the system to shift. So how do we create an understanding of that system that allows for change? If I bring you all the way back to the gut, we know what has to change to make the gut healthy. That's very easy. We don't know how to make that change easy for the person making the decision. That's very hard. How do we understand the system from what happens in a single person's gut all the way up to the policy level? Where does the money go? Whose resources are being directed where? And how do we make sure we're learning? We've got a large piece of work at the minute, which is to create learning systems, which I'm not a fan of jargon, but you probably use a lot of it. What on earth is a learning system? I'm not sure I really know yet, if I'm honest. But how do we create a system that learns in real time? So instead of 5 years later, we say, well, it didn't really do what we thought it was going to do, and that was a surprise, but we'll try again. How do we actually evolve in real time? people in the call who are working in practice, who work day to day delivering programs, who work day to day with people who are in the business of helping people get healthy, that's standard practice. Like evolution and adaptation is normal. But what's the science of that so that the best adaptations are happening all the time? If someone gets this right in Berlin, or gets this right in Dakota, or gets this right in Cape Town, how do we learn about that in Wathaurong, where I am, or in Ma, where many people are? And that's one of the key things. So I want you to hold on to one thing, which is this idea of systems thinking. I'm going to make this idea live and give you some practical examples. I'm also about to give you the most difficult slide I've got, so just bear with me, and I'm sorry about this. But this is the theory bit of the whole thing, where we start thinking about, well, what are we on about when we talk about what a system is? And what we're on about is there's actually different ways you can understand what a system is, which is what this thing down the left-hand side is, from just understanding that there is a system and it exists, all the way through to we understand exactly why things happen and we can game them. We can change a variable and we know something will change. We're interested in moving groups of people down this line. So just the plain starting point of there's a lot of moving parts in this system. We need to understand them so we can make change. Till we know what those parts are, till we know how they work together with each other, till we know how other people might think about it. So that helps us work out where to intervene. To we can predict what would happen if we acted. To we can assess what would happen if we acted. To we can adapt in real time. So that's the idea. And most people who do work in terms of improving the health of populations intuitively work somewhere in the middle of this list. And if you ask them, tell me why things happen. Why is it that 30 kids in our regional town have a very healthy gut and 30 kids in our urban town do not? They could have a good guess at what that's about. But how do we understand it in a way that we can do something about it? How do we generalize that so others can use it? And the other side of this is just showing some of the techniques we use to do that. I'm going to very specifically talk to you a little bit about causal loop diagrams in a moment, is the only thing. And Felice, just so you know, your camera's on again. just in case you're going to do anything you shouldn't. So let me bring that back to the day-to-day. This is our paper from day before yesterday, I think. Yesterday, what day are we on? Yeah, day before yesterday. So this is one, I'm going to keep coming back to this idea of what does it look like if a system's failing? If we think the goal of the system is the healthiest possible gut we can have, the best possible mental health we can have, the best possible health we can have, if donuts are 50 cents and a salad is $20, this system cannot support good health. Fundamental, not complicated. And the photo that you see here is actually about 10 k's from where Felice and I live, very, very close to both of our towns. And that's your drive home from school. So if you pick up, and I've got two teenagers that it seems it's impossible to fill them, like it's literally not possible to fill them full of food. That's what you're faced with if you want to feed them something on the way home. So that literally is orienting you towards a negative thing. So now what I'm going to do is change gears. I'm going to spend 5 minutes talking about a project we did to ask the communities to define what the system looks like to them in terms of providing access to healthy and nutritious food, and the ways they thought their system could be changed, and then give some examples of how that might work most effectively. We've done work all around the world. We've worked in about 30 countries or so, but I really want to share this example from the Latrobe Valley. For those in Australia, you'll be aware of Gippsland in eastern Victoria. For those not in Australia, if you're looking at a map, Australia is the sort of apple with a bite taken out of it down the bottom. At the right-hand side on the bottom is Victoria. At the right-hand side of that is the Latrobe Valley. And Food for All in the Latrobe Valley is organised to increase food security for people in that region. It's a traditionally industrial coal producing region, and food security is a major issue. And so we've been working with them for nearly a decade now to help think about ways that you understand the system to improve the health of the population. So this is Victoria here, and the region we're talking about is down here in the bottom right. I just want to make the point that there are 79 local government authorities in Victoria. The shaded ones, I'll be using information from them tonight from various projects that we've done. So the ones that aren't shaded in is just because my map making person hasn't quite got to it yet, but we work pretty much right across the state in terms of the work we're going to show you. So a lot of this work was led by our awesome postdoc Carmen Vargas, who's shown in the bottom left-hand side. And a big part of the question that we were asking was, can we understand the system from the point of view of people who live in it and want to change it? And if we can, what does that turn into for action? So what we did is we brought together people who understood the food system across the Latrobe Valley. So there are people who produced food, presented food, ate food, sold food, were involved in food in any particular way. And then we did 3 pieces of work with them. The first was to try and understand how they saw the system they were working in. The second was to try and understand what was already happening to improve the food system they worked in. And the third was to bring the whole community together to say, if we were going to fix this, what would we do? So these numbers look small, 16, 14, 31. These are leaders in the field across that community. And our starting point was to ask a question about how dynamic their food system is. So what we knew from the data that they had is over the past 5 years, actually things had been improving. Access to healthy and sustainable food for people in the Latrobe Valley had been going up, but it was still bad. It still wasn't good. So your options for healthy and sustainable food were actually pretty low, and that was having really serious impacts on people accessing emergency food relief, community school gardens, impact on climate, and so on and so on. So our starting point with this sort of work is to say, if you think about your community, why is this pattern happening? What's happening here that describes the pattern we're seeing in these data? I'm just going to take a pause and give you a chance to add into the chat. And what I'd love you to do is to think about your neighbourhood, the places in which you're living. And if I was to ask you to dot point 1, 2, or 3 things that explain what drives access to healthy and sustainable food, good or bad, what would you say? I'm just going to be quiet for a minute, and I'm going to ask people to write in the chat, what is it that drives access to healthy and sustainable food, for good or for bad, where you live? And I'll be quiet and give you a moment to do that now. So we've had 3 very nice people contribute, which is fantastic. And even just in 3 people's contributions, there are 8 or 9 or 10 issues that are really important to address. Thank you, Leslie. And please keep putting them in as I talk. But as you start looking at that list, you start realizing if we're going to tackle this problem, thinking we can tackle one variable, one thing, and ignore the rest of them is just not going to work. Because as soon as we press on one part of this system, multiple other parts of the system push back. And so what we're doing with communities is we're actually asking, how do we understand that whole story and get a comprehensive response? And so one of the things we use to do that is a piece of software, and I mentioned this at the start, that we've invented called Sticky, which stands for Systems Thinking in Community Knowledge Exchange, which helps us capture how people in a community see a problem and start understanding where the potential for change is. When we did this with the 60 people who understand the food system in the Latrobe Valley, they identified 55 different factors that impact access to healthy and sustainable food across the Latrobe Valley. And we summarised those into 4 themes to make it a bit easier to understand. So access and efficiency of the food relief services were really critical. Access to healthy food preferences, food literacy and availability of nutritious food, support for local production and a sustainable economy, and improving engagement and support capacity to build initiatives. So kind of a pretty good overlap. I'll just show you a little drill down on number 3 there of what that actually means in practice when you look at it. And when you look in a little bit more detail at what support for local production and a sustainable food economy is, these are the sorts of things people said. There were 26 different things that they said, well, all right, if we really want local food production, because we'd asked them about sustainability and health, they identified 26 different factors. And I don't think anyone would argue that these are important factors. These are critical things: culturally appropriate food, healthy food, affordability, being aware of the environmental impact, it being commercially viable, it being a business opportunity, the norms of the family, having places to grow the food. You can see that these are really important things. And if we were to take a traditional approach to problem solving, we would pick one and work on that and ignore the others. So a traditional approach to science is to say, I'm all about nutritional education and I'm going to randomize everything else out. And if my education program works, I'll know, and that'll mean nothing else works. And I think anyone who works in the real world knows that, well, actually, these things are all active at the same time. They're all changing in different ways. They all affect each other. And it might be better off if we understand them and how they work at the same time. So what we do with Sticky and what we do with the systems thinking is we start to build a picture of how each of these things interact and use that as the basis for design of a response, instead of saying we will pick one thing and fight with that. So each of these things, if we optimize them, would have a huge impact on the gut of people in that region. If we focus on one and ignore the others will have a huge impact on why that intervention is not working. Because if all we did is nutritional education and it still can't afford the healthy food, we're wasting our time. If we make the healthy food more affordable, but you don't know it's good for you, we're wasting our time. So the way we work in Sticky is we start building a story about how these things relate to each other. And I'm just going to tell you the story about what they told us about how you improve access to an efficiency of food relief. And what people told us was affordability of healthy foods leads to access to healthy foods. Kind of pretty obvious, right? The more affordable a healthy food is, the more likely I am to access it. Okay, fine. But if we build that story up a little bit, the solid line here actually means if I increase one thing, I increase the other thing. So the solid line means if I increase affordability, I increase access. Okay, so the more affordable a healthy food is, the more likely I am to access it. The dotted line works the other way. If affordability goes up, my cost of living goes down, dotted line. But if the cost of living goes up, the affordability goes down. So all of a sudden, without doing anything more than thinking about 3 factors, no more than 3 factors, we all of a sudden have a dynamic system that's starting to say, hey, if you press on one thing here and you ignore the other things, you're going to fail, or at least it's not going to be optimal. And if I complicate that just a tiny bit more, as affordability goes up, we reduce socioeconomic disadvantage. So those who find a hard time buying healthy foods, that's less hard. But as socioeconomic disadvantage goes up, affordability goes down. So we're starting to see a bigger picture. And actually, as disadvantage goes up, it becomes more normal to take food relief. If our goal is a healthy diet and nothing else, normalization of food relief is a good outcome, because we want people eating a healthy diet. But that's not how the system works. There's multiple things going on. And in fact, we start building a much more comprehensive picture where we start thinking about food preferences and availability. And this access, if we increase access to healthy food, the cost should go down. That's simple market economics. If the cost goes up, affordability goes down. So we're starting to build a more comprehensive picture of how this system works. And I expect most people on the call have at least one or two of these places where they try and intervene in systems. Cost of living decreases health and well-being, but if health and well-being is better, cost of living goes down. Health and well-being increases healthy food consumption. The healthier I am, the healthier I eat. The healthier I eat, the healthier I am. There's a feedback loop. If I can trip that, I start impacting other parts. If I can increase access to healthy food, I can increase healthy food consumption. There's a lot going on here, and I'm about to make it horribly more complicated, and then I'll make it simpler again, I promise. But we get stuck in picking one thing at the expense of everything else. And we never ask the people living in the system, what does it look like from where you sit? And if we were going to start pressing and helping to fix this, what's going to go wrong if we get it wrong? What are the unintended consequences of us getting this wrong? If we, and we're experiencing this in one of our projects, if we drop healthy food baskets into your environment and provide them at cost, and you don't eat them because you don't understand, you don't like the vegetables in there, what is that doing for your attitude towards healthy food? It's actually making it worse, not better, because we didn't start from the point of view of what is the system that you're living in and how do things work in terms of feedback loops and relationships of cause and effect. So I just want to give you this idea, because I want you to see that one of the things we're trying to do is understand the multiple relationships that affect a problem that we're thinking about, and to understand that there's multiple different points. This is how people who live in the Latrobe Valley see access to healthy and sustainable food, which we know has a fundamental impact on their gut health. So if we're trying to improve their gut health and we don't take this into consideration, we are going to fail. It's not going to work because these things will push against us. I'm going to show you their full model now, all the things they thought were important. Please don't freak out. This is I keep saying second most complicated slide. I don't have a most complicated slide because I don't really want participants to drop off. This is the second most complicated slide. And what it does is this picture I've shown you here, it will put it in the context of all the things they told us. So what you can see over the left-hand side here are those things they told us about access and food preferences. But if we want to change the system that people are living in to improve food, we have to think about how we support local food production and a sustainable food economy, and how we improve community engagement, and how we increase healthy food preferences, and how we improve efficiency. So at minimum, we have to understand this and know what we're ignoring if we're trying to change this. So what did this project lead to? Where did this get us? And I think, Jake, I've got maybe 5 minutes. Is that right? Or you're on mute. That's a fine, by the way.
Sorry, 5 or 10 minutes, yeah.
5 or 10, perfect. Okay. So what did it lead to? So we didn't just say, can you please describe your system? And this makes no sense to people on the call because you didn't build it. But if you're working in this system and you built it, you can see yourself, you can see your program, you can see the work you're doing, you can see what you want to change. So we then said, all right, can you tell us what's already happening? Can you tell us what needs to happen? And can you tell us what that action looks like? And we saw, 20 different actions across 4 different themes across this system. And they said, well, we want to see community-based and led action, we want to see policy change, we want to see multimedia campaigns, and we want to see settings-based change. And critically, what we asked them is, don't just tell us what someone else should do. What is it that you can do to change this system to improve the sustainability and quality of the food that's provided in this community? And just to give you an example of the policy change one there, the one in red. So stuff maybe you'd expect. 10 people thought a food voucher program would be good. Could we have a farmers co-op subsidised to ensure that the food is local and it's cheap? Can we ensure organisational policies around healthy food and drink procurement? These seem a bit motherhood and apple pie. I'm going to give you a concrete example of how that changes at the really genuine level. But this is the community leaders saying to the rest of the community, these are the changes we want to see to improve the health of our population. Can we get everybody to agree that we just get rid of this idea that it's all too hard and create a food revolution? Can we go organic and chemical free? Can we set a platform that says Latrobe Valley is the world leader in providing healthy, nutritious, sustainable food? Can we make sure that workplaces have healthy food? They had a bunch of community-based and led things, and I'll just talk about the orange ones, but you can see them here. So the development of community gardens, we're a big fan of these, but I think they're hard because they're complex, which is why the system stuff helps. It's all well and good to say build a community garden in a way. It's quite difficult to get that to actually fly. And it's more than just a community garden is a good idea. Same deal, how do you normalise the idea of sharing food from veggie gardens? We have a brilliant example of that where the food coming out of that garden gets sold the highest income suburbs all around the school. The one place that the veggies don't go is to kids and families of that school. And so how do you overcome those sorts of issues? Multimedia in terms of how do we make food relief normal, I showed you a moment ago. And then what about in specific settings? We've seen some really brilliant examples around the world of how you integrate this idea of connection with land, connection with food, connection with school in terms of all parts of the curriculum. So people in Australia would have seen Magda's Big Health Challenge, and they did a major showcase on a lot of the work we'd done, which is where food produced locally was run through the school and kids learnt about that in their school. How do we make a kid who goes into grade 7, who's 13 years old, who understands where all of the food in their diet comes from and understands what that means for them and for their health? So I'm just going to change gears and show you some of the outcomes of some of that work that we've done in other parts of the state. So I'm going to talk a little bit about something called Respond, which is in northern Victoria, which is the purple area, and something called Who Stops, which is the yellow and I don't know what that colour is. Peach, what do we call that? Whatever that colour is on the left-hand side. And what we did is the same set of activities, communities, but one of our starting points was this idea that data we had from kids showed that their sugar-sweetened beverage consumption was very high. The other thing we knew in those communities was the taste of water was a real problem. So water taste was an issue. So if you're a parent of a kid in that region and you're picking them up from school and taking them home and wanting to cook a healthy dinner, and you stop in the supermarket to get dinner, they can't drink the tap water because it's high mineral content. They don't like the taste. This is your choice for drinks to put on the table. You can do whatever you want about telling them what's healthy. You can do whatever you want about telling them what sugar sweetened beverages is. 75 cents for a litre and a quarter of cola, $2.15 for a litre and a quarter of water. That's not a choice, that's a system failure. And one of the things we did with them is we built up a model of why that was happening and what it did to consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages and consumptions of water. And so you'll see this is kind of like the model before. If I drink more water, I drink less sugar-sweetened beverages and vice versa. What this allows us to do is to build a quantitative model, apologies, second most complicated slide, I promise, of how all these things fit together. And it allows us to do the maths of how these things perform together. So if you do nothing, this is how many litres per month a person drinks of sugar-sweetened beverage in that region, and this is time across the bottom. So the blue says if you just leave a kid alone by 5 years in, they'll be drinking about 34 litres of Coke a month, 34 litres of sugar-sweetened beverages. If you role model a better change, you get a reduction. If you role model an improved taste, you get them down to 25. But if you role model, improve the taste of the water and reduce marketing, all of a sudden you get them down to a much lower consumption. What I hope you can see through that conversation is if you understand the complexity and you attack multiple parts of the problem at once, you get a synergistic response much better than doing nothing or only doing one thing. That's the point. What does that look like for the humans in the room? So these are the leaders of the health services in that region. 13 health services banned sugar-sweetened beverages in every health service across the region. They were role modelling, they reduced the marketing. You went into a health service overnight, you could no longer buy sugar-sweetened beverages. Because of the taste of the water, they were giving patients sugar-sweetened water, which we call cordial in Australia, because they knew the patients wouldn't drink the water because it tasted terrible. Overnight, they changed that policy. That led to a $52 million investment in improving the quality of water in that region on the basis that it was really important to improve the health of that population. So we're moving from, we need to understand the complexity, agree what we want to have changed, to a political shift. If I take you all the way back to that Lancet work I talked about, the nature is at the start of it, but the policy is the next step out. We can actually change policy to change the way we engage with our natural environment. They made a whole bunch of other different changes. I just want to spend 2 more minutes talking briefly about the results of that work. So we saw a lot of different changes. I'll show you those in a minute, but we asked the community, the leaders of the community, if you now understand your system, what could be done, who should do it, who's going to do it, when's that going to happen? And we saw radical change happen very, very quickly. And so these are some of the things we saw change. This was a NHMRC funded study. 480 things changed in that community over a 3-year period. That included how kids got to school, how much fruit and veg they ate, water consumption, sugary drink consumption. Their mental health improved significantly, as did their physical well-being, and we got in their overweight and obesity. We did the same work later on in Northern Victoria. So in this one, we were active for 2 years and then we left. We did the same thing in Northern Victoria, which is the one that Magda picked up. That's Magda in the top right. And instead of us doing the work, we trained 500 people in the community to do the work for themselves. And the idea being we were very hopeful that it would last beyond us. And what we saw, even with COVID in the middle, is a massive improvement in psychosocial well-being because diets improved, a massive improvement in physical well-being, and a much bigger reduction in unhealthy weight. So the lesson from this is very much involving the community in the problem and understanding the problem themselves is a major part of getting a solution that makes sense. I just want to point very quickly to some work. We'll share these slides. We did the same piece of work with Indigenous populations across Victoria, and our finding was that this was a great way of being able to communicate. It was felt to be much easier way of engaging with complexity and a way of being able to see the world and share, communicate how things look. So at its basic level, ways of doing, ways of knowing, ways of being, and how those feed back on each other. And we did that for food policy across all Victorian community-owned health organisations. So as you can probably hear, lots more I could say. What I will do, though, is pause there and say thank you and ask for questions.
Thanks, Stephen. That was amazing. I love systems thinking. You explained it really well. So any questions, please put them in the chat and I will relay them to Stephen. So Craig says, seems criminal that cola is cheaper than water. Wonder if it's really cheaper to produce and bottle or a business strategy to build a habit of sugar consumption.
Yeah, one of the things that surprised us when we learnt it and then made us feel like we might be on the right track is most of the fast food industries use systems thinking to design where they go into new markets. So they use a lot of that approach to say, which market do we go into first? And that picture I showed you from the newspaper of the main street with all of the fast food outlets around it, it's a suburb that's maybe 2 years old, maybe not even. And the first buildings in the suburb before there was a petrol station, before there was any houses, were fast food restaurants.
Yeah. Yeah, crazy. So I wonder, in a community setting, what the best entry point is for applying a tool like Sticky, and who should ideally facilitate it outside of a research project. I guess you'd hold workshops with certain areas of the community, but how does that work?
Yeah, we really deliberately want to build capacity for other people to do this work. So we have training packages that allow that help people get ready to do that, and that ranges from we'll help you do it to people learn how to do that and we support them to do it to people learn how to do that and they don't need us anymore. So a
Mm.
lot of the communities we worked in use these techniques and we don't even know they're doing it. They're just doing it as a way of working. And there's a big shift happening globally, really probably led by a few places in Victoria to do that. So Western Victoria is using it a lot for climate resilience and adaptation. And we're not involved. They use the techniques and they use the science, but we're not part of that conversation. And there's other places that are using these techniques, and we quite often see groups get together and say, can we have a conversation about which part of the system we're working on today so that we're not just saying, oh, well, we have an agenda and we're working through it. It's like, okay, which parts of the system we're working on? How do we understand it? What's got to change? Can we see it move?
Yeah, right. So where would somebody go if somebody wanted to, start this kind of system thinking process in a community? Where would they go first?
Yep. So there is a website for Sticky, Sticky STICKE.io. But there's a lot of different avenues to access systems thinking. Have a Google, uh, look us up and see what we do. But there are lots of different ways that you can get access to that sort of thinking. Be a bit of a cynic. I would want to know what the people you're working with have done before and how well it's gone before you feel comfortable that it's the right thing. It's sort of 200 years old and it's a new field at the same time. So you can meet some people
Yeah.
that say, "Hey, we're reinventing this is brand new innovation," and actually it's not really. The
Mm.
technology helps access and so on and so on, but the science is actually pretty well established. It's just not been used much in health or public health in the past. So have a Google. Very welcome to reach out to me. There's also stuff on the Deakin website, stuff on the Sticky website as well, but we're certainly not the only port of call.
Okay, thanks. How do you measure whether using the sticky app or tool actually leads to better outcomes for food systems? I know you've mentioned sort of some modeling approaches, etc., but can you expand
Yeah,
on that a little bit?
yeah, great question. So we kind of do it two ways. The traditional way is we create a randomized trial where the intervention is to have your capacity built to use systems thinking, and the comparison is normal practice. So, the test we're asking is, does having the ability to understand the system in a new way and work together in a new way create a better outcome than standard practice? And that's really what I showed you. I really showed you using systems thinking versus standard practice. So that's one way of doing it. The more funky way is to develop simulation models of, if we can understand how the system works and we can put numbers to how those relationships work, then we can simulate how it would behave if we did something. Therefore, we can run alternate strategies and say, well, what if we just hit here, here, and here? What if we
Yeah.
did 5 things? What if we did? One of the things I'd recommend everyone looks at, and I'll put it in the chat because I know we're going to close really soon, is check out a thing called En-ROADS, which I ran out of time to tell you about. But if you look up En-ROADS and system dynamics, there's a really brilliant online simulation model that allows you to test different strategies for climate change mitigation. And one of our goals is for anyone anywhere on the planet. I'm in a community, I can tell you these things about my community. What are my options? And if I did this, this, and this, what impact is that going to have on the health of my community versus this versus this? And at the minute, that's purely a function of who I know and what I know. So we don't have any access to best practice, let alone intelligent decision making at the minute.
Yeah, right. Okay. Thanks for that. Good tip. So Ella says, thanks so much for a fascinating presentation. I wonder about how you measure the change in the health and well-being outcomes when, as you mentioned, there's so many different factors at play in a local food system, let alone the influence of the global context. So I think you kind of answered that a little bit, but maybe you could expand.
Yeah, so it's most basic, and because the funding bodies want this, it's an RCT structure. So this group of communities got systems thinking, this group of communities didn't, and then we measure kids' mental health, kids' physical activity status, kids' well-being, and a whole bunch of other metrics in both communities. And what we see is everything else being equal, if we support those communities to use systems thinking to improve the health of the kids, they're far better off than normal practice. Not that normal practice is bad, because what the systems thinking is doing is supercharging the people who do the normal practice. But we're just trying to evolve and get better and better.
Yeah, cool. Do you have like some solid examples then? I guess from this, I forgot the area you said now. But do you have examples where this kind of changing the systems is actually leading to beneficial outcomes for the community?
Yeah, so I rushed through them, but those 2 slides I showed of the 2 different trials and the 2 different regions, they're all significant measures of change. So we
Yeah.
did see significant improvements in psychosocial health, significant improvements in physical well-being, significant improvements in diet behaviour, significant improvements in active transport, and significant
Okay. Yeah.
improvements in healthy weight status. Yeah. So I know there's a lot in there. I'm happy to share papers and stuff, but yeah, they're for those who know, NHMRC, NIH funded trials, so they're highest possible quality.
Amazing. Any further questions before we wrap up? Just give it 1 minute. Doesn't look like anyone's typing. Okay. Thank you, Stephen. That was brilliant talk. And everybody, round of applause that Stephen. And yeah, hope you enjoyed the talk and hope you keep enjoying the series. So I'm just going to post in the chat some of the talks that we've got on next week in case you'd like to join. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And again, thank you very much, Stephen.